In 9.5, we're going to switch shapes. We're switching to pyramids and cones. But you're going to have to do surface area and volume of pyramids and cones. And the nice thing about pyramids and cones is that they both have the same volume formula. I remember when I first started teaching geometry, I would have a pyramid and a rectangular prism that were exactly the same thing. Because if you cover up this formula, you have the big B times H, which is the same for a rectangular prism. And so if I had a rectangular prism that has the same height as a cone, you could actually fill that cone up all the way, pour it into the rectangular prism 3 times, and it comes out exactly the same volume. 3 of the cones would fill in that rectangular prism exactly 3 times. So the volume of a pyramid or a cone is 1/3 the area of the base times the height. The only difference is the area of the base formula for each. So it could be a square pyramid, it could be a hexagonal pyramid, it could be a pentagonal pyramid. The base might change. For example, if I had a 5-sided shape that's on the bottom, let me switch over to red. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Your base could be a pentagon. The top of your pyramid is a dot, and each vertex just goes directly to that top. This would be a pentagonal pyramid. Your area of the base formula is just kind of like what we were working on, except sometimes it changes. Sometimes it's a square. So you can do side squared. If it's a pentagon, you might have to use 1/2 the apothem times the perimeter. Or if it's a cone and it's circular, then you're going to use pi r squared, depending what the base is. The base formula is different for both of those. If it's a cone, you're going to use pi r squared because the base is a circle. Now, one thing you do need to know that I have here underlined, H stands for the height of the pyramid or the cone. We're talking about this height right here. H. Height is up the center of the cone. The height of the pyramid is from the center of the bottom up. It is perpendicular to the highest point of the pyramid, and it has to be perpendicular to the base. That's what H stands for, from the base to the highest point. What you need to know is that there's also something else on these things, and it's called L. L is the slant height. It's the height that goes from the top to the side. And so if I was looking at one of these triangles, from the top, perpendicular to the side, that would be L. L stands for the slant height. I don't know why actually I do know why they don't use S. They do not use S because they don't want you to think it's the side length of the base. You might be looking at this as the side length, so they don't want you to confuse those 2 letters. Just so you know. The slant height is the distance from the side to the top of the pyramid. It is perpendicular as well. They use the letter L for it. You will most likely have to use the Pythagorean Theorem several times when you are going from H to L to most likely the side length divided by 2. You'll see what I mean, and I have 2 examples picked out that's going to show that to you, just so you know. Sometimes you're given L, but you're not given the height. You might have to do a little bit of math to figure that out. For example, if you're trying to find the volume and they give you the outside, the slant height, you're going to have to calculate what H is before you can solve the problem. How are you going to do that? You're going to use the Pythagorean theorem for this triangle that is inside of this pyramid. I'm hoping that makes sense to you. You'll use something like this as your slant height. You're going to use something like 0.6 down here because that would be half of your side length. That's why I have this as S over 2. And so we will have to find the surface area of a pyramid. You're not going to have to find the surface area of a cone, so don't worry about that. We're going to use slant height as L, don't forget. And so the surface area of a pyramid is the lateral area plus the area of the base, which means that you have a bunch of triangles when you think about it. If you have a pyramid with a square base, it's 1/2 the side length times the slant height, and there's 4 of those. When I think of a pyramid with a square base, let me just kind of draw a square base pyramid. That's supposed to be a square base pyramid, okay? If I were to open it up, this is called the net. If you were to fold this flat thing and think of each one as a piece of cardboard and you were to fold it, it would make that pyramid shape. So when you look at these things, I kind of want you to start visualizing in 3 dimensions what we're looking for. If we're trying to find the surface area, we have 4 triangles. That would be the lateral area. 1/2 the base times the height of these triangles, otherwise known as the side length. Now, our textbook simplifies this problem. Instead of doing 1/2 S, the side length, times the slant height, our textbook says 4 times S is the same thing as the perimeter of the base. So instead of doing 4S, they simplify that to being the perimeter. That might help you. It's a little bit easier, so I wrote down what our textbook has, which is 1/2 P times the slant height plus the area of the base. Now, with that being said, the rest are examples. If you would like to do these with me in your packet, you're welcome to do so. Number 4, find the surface area of the square pyramid given its slant height, round to the nearest tenth. So I'm going to go and use this formula, 1/2 the perimeter of the base times the slant height plus the area of the base. What is the perimeter of this base? If this is a square pyramid, that means the base is a square. Squares have all sides that are the same. What's the perimeter? If this is 1.2, what's the perimeter going to be? Thank you. Do you know what the slant height is? The slant height, by definition, is the height of the side of the pyramid. Does this go up the side? Think of the slant height as what the distance would be measuring on the roof. If you were to measure your roof, you would go from the front of your house all the way up to the top of your roof when you measure it. This is the slant height. 2.8. Plus the area of the base. Here's my base. It's a square. How do I find its area? What numbers am I going to use? If you know, tell the person you're sitting next to, please. I'm hoping you said something like 1.2 times 1.2 or 1.2 squared. And I like to write everything down before I go to grab my calculator, and then I double check this. Got my perimeter, got my slant height, got my area of the base squared. Perfect. I'm rounding to the nearest tenth. Then I go to grab my calculator. And I'm going to type in 0.5 on 0.5 times 4.8 times 2.8 plus 1.2 squared. Let me double check. 4.8, 2.8. 1.2 squared. Switch this to a decimal. 8.16 rounds to 8.2 centimeters squared. But number 7 gets harder. The reason why number 7 gets harder is because I gave you the formula for a volume of a pyramid, and it was 1/3 big B times h, where h is the perpendicular height. Did they give you the perpendicular height on this one? No. 2.8 is the slant height. You will need to calculate what the actual height is. So right now, here's what we know. I know what the area of the base is. 1.2 squared. But I don't know what h is. I'm only given the slant height. In order to figure out what h is, I'm going to have to do the Pythagorean Theorem to figure it out. This side is 1.2, which means half the distance is 0.6. And then I have that right triangle. And so I can go over here and use the Pythagorean Theorem to figure out what the h is. H is not the hypotenuse here. The slant height is the hypotenuse. So I'm seeing 0.6 squared plus h squared equals 2.8 squared. I'm going to subtract 0.6. Subtract 0.6 squared. I am then going to square root 2.8 squared minus 0.6 squared. And that's what I'm going to plug into my calculator. .8 squared minus 0.6 squared. It gives me that. I'm going to say it's about 2.735-ish. Now I can take that and plug it into my formula. 1/3 1.2 squared times by the 2.735. The best part is it's already in my calculator. So I already have that value. On my calculator I can do 1/3. You can use the fraction button, or 1 divided by 3 is the same thing. Times 1.2 squared times by that decimal. But guess what? I already have it in my calculator, so I use the answer button. It saves me from typing that in again. It's a shortcut. Save you time. That's why they give you an answer button right there, because it will save you time from having to retype it in. Plus, it keeps those 9 decimal places, which will make our answer more accurate. The volume to the nearest 10th place, about 1.3 centimeters cubed. Is that what you got on your calculator when you try? See a couple of heads nodding. That confirms. Last example? No, 2 more examples. 2 more examples. Number 13. Find the volume of each cone in terms of pi, and also rounded as indicated. So we're going to have to give our answer in 2 different ways here. There's an and they underlined it. They're telling us and give it in terms of pi and round it like they tell us to. So I have to do the volume, and the formula is the same. 1/3 the big base times the h. One-third. The base here is a circle, so I need to use pi r squared. What's my radius of this thing? 2.5. That is ugly handwriting. I am sorry. Anybody who sees that? Okay, let's do that a little nicer, Mr. Paramo. 2.5, the radius pi r squared. There's B. The height is the perpendicular height from the base to the highest point of the cone. What's our height? And why do they throw the 5 like that? One, to find the radius, but some of you might actually try to use the 5. They distract you. They lay the cone on its side, but remember it's from the base to the highest point of the cone. Equals V. In terms of pi, most of the time our calculators do things in terms of pi. Let me check on this problem. 1/3 pi 2.5 squared times 15. Most of the time, these calculators give their answer in terms of pi. 1/25/4 pi. Now, if you're wondering what that is, 1/25/4, that is the same thing I would also accept 31.25 pi. Those two answers are exactly the same thing. Go back up. So by the way, so here's this one. I can go up here and look at my previous answer by pressing the up arrow. That's why I never press clear. Those of you who were taught, press clear 10 times. Then you get rid of all your work that you just did. If ever I need to go to something, I can go up and look at all the previous problems I did. That's what I love about these calculators. They have fields of your previous problems. Don't press clear. All clear clears everything, all your previous work. Now I can go back and edit anything I want. Now I can just switch it to a decimal. So I have the first answer, and I need to round to the nearest cubic inch. What's the nearest cubic inch? 98 inch cube. So those, I would accept either one. You got to have one with terms of pi and the other. If the calculator switches it only to a decimal, you would have to multiply the 1/3 times the 2.5 squared times the 15 and then put that in front of pi. If your calculator doesn't have a pi or mode, multiply everything out to get these numbers, by the way. Last example. They give you the volume. You have to find x. We have to find our answer in simplest radical form. I know how to find the volume of a pyramid. The volume of the pyramid is 1/3 big B times H. They give me the volume. They say the volume is 126 cubic inches. Or not cubic, units cubed. Now the area of the base, here's the base. What shape is that? Is it equilateral? No. There's a right angle in it. It can't be equilateral. So what does that mean? That means that we have to know what the formula for the area of a triangle is. The area of a triangle is 1/2 the base of the height of the triangle. I'll put little triangles there next to my B and a H so I don't get confused. This height is the height of the pyramid. This is the perpendicular height. Do we know that value? I think we do. It's 14. Of the triangle, I have a base and a height. I think this is where x and 9 are going to come into play. And so we have 1/3 of 1/2 times x times 9 times 14. That's all multiplication. Because it's all multiplication, I recommend that we multiply everything first before we do anything else. X is going to be right here. 3 goes into 9 3 times. 2 goes into 14 7 times. I'm left with 3 times 7, which is 21x equals 126. 126 divided by 21 x is going to be equal to 6 units long. We're going to stop your notes right there.